What if the person you finally married had been desperately in love with you for over 2 decades, and you never knew? Zara pressed her palm against the cool glass of the observation deck, her luminescent skin catching the starlight as Earth rotated below. And for the first time since saying I do 3 hours ago, she wondered if she truly knew the man she'd just married. David Chen stood behind her, quiet as always, his reflection barely visible in the reinforced viewport. And something about the way he looked at her had always looked at her suddenly felt like a mystery she'd been too blind to see. "You're thinking too loud again," he said softly, that gentle smile playing at his lips. The same smile that had greeted her every morning for the past year since she'd asked him, quite suddenly, if he'd consider marrying her. To secure her citizenship on Earth, she'd needed someone trustworthy, someone kind, someone who wouldn't expect anything in return. And David had simply nodded, adjusted his glasses, and said, "Of course, Zara, whatever you need." No hesitation, no questions, just acceptance. That should have been her first clue. The wedding had been small, practical, witnessed by 2 officials and a tired clerk who'd yawned through the entire ceremony. But when David had slipped the simple silver band onto her finger, his hand had trembled. And Zara had caught something in his eyes, something vast and oceanic and terrifyingly deep before he'd blinked it away. Now, as the space station hummed around them, and Earth glowed like a blue jewel in the darkness, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just stepped into a story that had been written long before she knew any of the words. "David," she began, turning to face him fully, her pointed ears twitching slightly the way they did when she was nervous. "Why did you really agree to this?" He looked startled, like a deer caught in headlights, and for a moment she saw his carefully constructed composure crack. "I told you," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You needed help, and I wanted to help you." She crossed her arms, tilting her head in that peculiar way that made her long platinum hair cascade over one shoulder. "You could have just vouched for me, written a character reference. Instead, you married me. A legal marriage. That's not nothing." David turned away, gripping the railing of the observation deck, and Zara noticed his knuckles going white. "What aren't you telling me?" The silence stretched between them like a physical thing, taut and trembling, and then David laughed, a quiet, broken sound that made Zara's heart's yes, plural, her species had to clench painfully. "Do you remember the rescue of Sanctuary Station?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zara frowned. "That was 23 years ago. I was barely 17. My father's ship was part of the coalition forces that evacuated the civilians before the reactor breach." David nodded, still not looking at her. "Deck 7, Section C. I was 8 years old, hiding in a supply closet with my mother because the evacuation alarms were screaming and we got separated from the rest of our group. The oxygen was running out. My mother was unconscious. I thought we were going to die." A cold understanding began to dawn on Zara, trickling down her spine like ice water. "The station was massive. Thousands were evacuated. I barely remember most of it. Just running through corridors, scanning for life signs. My father yelling coordinates through the comm. You found us," David said. And now he did turn to face her, and his eyes were shining with unshed tears. "A 17-year-old alien girl, who couldn't have weighed more than 100 pounds. But you ripped that closet door open with your bare hands because it was jammed. And you carried my mother over one shoulder, and held me with your other arm, and you ran. God, Zara, you ran through fire and falling debris and sections that were venting into space. And you didn't stop running until we were on your father's ship and the medical team was taking us from you." Zara's mind raced, flipping through fragmented memories of that chaotic day. Smoke and screaming and the desperate math of how many souls she could save before the reactor blew. She'd made 17 trips into that dying station, saved 43 people. The specifics had blurred together in the aftermath, trauma and exhaustion, melding the faces into an indistinct parade of terror and relief. I don't remember you specifically," she admitted, guilt flooding through her. "I'm sorry. I saved so many that day, and everything was happening so fast." "I know," David interrupted, and he was smiling now, that same gentle smile but with something raw and honest beneath it. "You probably saved dozens of people that day. But Zara, you saved me. And when I was sitting in the medical bay, wrapped in thermal blankets and watching you through the window as you collapsed from exhaustion, something happened in my 8-year-old heart. The doctors said you'd pushed yourself past what your physiology should have allowed. You'd given so much that you nearly died yourself. He took a shaky breath. My mother was in a coma for 3 weeks, but she survived because of you. And I sat by her bedside every day. And every day I thought about the alien girl with the pointed ears and the glowing skin and the bravest heart I'd ever seen. I promised myself that if I ever saw you again, I'd tell you what you meant to me. What you'd given me. Zara felt her throat tighten. David, they transferred us to Earth after my mother recovered, he continued, the words spilling out now like he'd held them back for so long that they'd gained their own momentum. I didn't know your name. Didn't know how to find you. The coalition had classified most of the sanctuary station records, and I was just a kid, but I never forgot you. I drew pictures of you from memory, kept them in a box under my bed, like some kind of shrine. My mother thought I had an imaginary friend. He laughed again, that broken sound. When I got older, I studied xenolinguistics and coalition law. Told myself it was because I wanted to work in interspecies relations, but really, I think I was just trying to understand the universe that had created someone like you. And then, 10 years ago, you walked into the embassy where I was working as a translator. Zara's eyes widened. The day I applied for my long-term visa, you were the one who processed my application. I recognized you immediately, David said, and a tear finally escaped, tracking down his cheek. It had been 13 years, but you looked exactly the same. That same determined expression. Those same eyes. I nearly had a heart attack right there at my desk. You probably thought I was the most incompetent bureaucrat you'd ever met because I kept stammering and dropping my stylus. Zara did remember that, actually. She'd found it endearing. The nervous human man who'd blushed every time she spoke and had triple-checked all her paperwork with such meticulous care. After that day, she'd started seeing him around at interspecies cultural events, at the library where she studied human literature, at the little cafe that served both Earth coffee and Andromedan tea. She'd thought it was coincidence, serendipity. You were following me, she whispered, but there was no accusation in her voice, only wonder. Not following, David corrected gently. Just being where you were, hoping you'd notice me. I learned your favorite coffee order, memorized your schedule, started reading the same books you read, just so I'd have something to talk about if you ever spoke to me. And you did speak to me. You were so kind, so brilliant. Every conversation we had, I fell a little more in love with you. He wiped at his eyes, looking embarrassed. God, this sounds so pathetic when I say it out loud. 23 years of pining after someone who doesn't even remember saving your life. It's not pathetic, Zara said fiercely, crossing the distance between them in 2 swift strides. David, it's not pathetic. She struggled for words, her usually eloquent mind stuttering over the enormity of what he'd just revealed. 23 years. He'd loved her for 23 years. Since he was a child. Since the worst day of his life had intersected with one of hers. Why didn't you tell me? She asked, placing her hands on his shoulders, forcing him to meet her eyes. When I asked you to marry me, why didn't you say something? Why didn't you tell me that you'd been in love with me for over 2 decades? David's smile was sad, but there was a peace in it too, like a man who'd finally set down a weight he'd been carrying for far too long. Because you didn't love me back, he said simply. You needed a friend, a favor. And I would rather be your friend for the rest of my life than risk losing you by making you uncomfortable with feelings you don't return. You asked me to marry you for a green card essentially, for paperwork. And I said yes, because 23 years ago, you gave me and my mother our lives back. And if spending my life legally bound to you is the only way I can begin to repay that debt, then I'll take it. Even if it's just on paper. Just on paper, Zara echoed, and something inside her chest cracked open. All those moments over the past year, since she'd proposed this arrangement, suddenly played through her mind in a different light. David always having her favorite tea ready, David listening to her ramble about her research for hours without complaint, David staying up with her through the anniversary of her father's death, even though he had work early the next morning, David, who never asked for anything, never demanded anything, just gave and gave and gave. You idiot, she breathed, and then she was kissing him, her hands cupping his face, and David made a startled sound against her lips before he melted into her, his arms coming around her waist like he'd been waiting his entire life for permission to hold her. The kiss was soft and desperate, and tasted like salt from both their tears. and when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zara pressed her forehead to his. "You magnificent, selfless, idiotic human," she whispered. "Did it never occur to you that maybe I asked you to marry me because my brain finally caught up with what my hearts had been trying to tell me for months?" David blinked at her, confusion and hope warring on his face. "What? I could have asked anyone," Zara said, her thumbs stroking his cheeks. "I have friends, colleagues, people who owed me favors. But I asked you, David Chen. I asked you because you made me laugh, because you brought me tea without being asked, because you looked at me like I was something precious, and I'd never felt that before. Because somewhere in the past 10 years of friendship, I'd started to feel like my day wasn't complete until I'd talked to you." She laughed, the sound wet and joyful. "I'm not human. I don't always understand your courtship rituals. I thought proposing marriage was a logical next step. I didn't realize I was supposed to call it dating first, or have some big romantic revelation. I just knew I wanted you in my life permanently, in whatever form you'd accept." David was staring at her like she'd hung the stars, and Zara felt her luminescent skin brighten, a physiological response her species had when experiencing intense emotion. "Are you saying, I'm saying I love you, you beautiful fool," Zara said, and she was laughing and crying simultaneously. "Maybe I haven't loved you for 23 years, but I love you now. I love you enough to want this marriage to be real. Not just paperwork, not just convenience. Real." She paused, suddenly uncertain. "If that's what you want too. I know you've built up this idea of me in your head for over 2 decades, and I'm probably going to disappoint you. I'm messy and obsessive about my work, and I sing off-key in the shower, and sometimes I forget that humans need more than 4 hours of sleep." David silenced her with another kiss, this one deeper, more assured, and when he pulled back, he was grinning through his tears. "Zara, I've been your friend for 10 years. I know you're messy. I've seen you at your worst and your best and every moment in between, and I've loved you through all of it. The girl I fell in love with at 8 years old was a hero, yes, but the woman I'm in love with now is so much more than that. You're real and complicated and brilliant and terrible at cooking, and you're the only person who's ever made me believe in fate." "We don't have fate in Andromedan philosophy," Zara said, but she was smiling, her eyes sparkling with that peculiar luminescence that David had noticed from the very beginning. "We have convergence, the idea that some paths are meant to cross and recross until both travelers realize they're meant to walk together." "Convergence," David repeated, testing the word. "I like that." "Good," Zara said, lacing her fingers through his. "Because you're stuck with me now, legally and emotionally. No backing out." "Wouldn't dream of it," David murmured, and he kissed her again, softer this time, reverent. Below them, Earth continued its eternal rotation, indifferent to the small miracle happening on the space station above it. Two souls who had found each other in fire and chaos 23 years ago, who had circled each other for a decade, and who had finally figured out that the distance between friendship and love was just the courage to reach across and hold on. "I have something for you," David said suddenly, pulling back and reaching into his jacket pocket. He withdrew a small, battered metal box, the kind that might have once held mints or small tools, and when he opened it, Zara gasped. Inside were dozens of small drawings, faded and creased with age, all depicting the same scene from different angles: a young alien girl with pointed ears and glowing skin, carrying a woman and child through smoke and fire. "You kept them," she whispered, picking up one of the drawings with trembling fingers. The artistry was crude, clearly done by a child, but the emotion in every line was palpable. "All of them. They were all I had of you for 13 years, David said quietly. "My most precious possession. I used to look at them whenever life got hard and remind myself that people like you existed in the universe. That courage and selflessness were real, not just abstract concepts. You saved my life twice, Zara. Once on Sanctuary Station, and once every day after, just by being the standard I tried to live up to." Zara felt fresh tears spilling down her cheeks, and she carefully placed the drawing back in the box, closing it with reverence. "I'm going to make you so happy," she declared, her voice fierce with determination. "I'm going to spend every day showing you that your faith in me wasn't misplaced. I'm going to love you so well that 23 years of waiting will feel worth it." "It was already worth it," David said, pulling her close again, and Zara could feel his heartbeat against her chest, steady and strong and alive because of a choice she'd made half a lifetime ago without knowing the ripples it would create. Every moment was worth it for this, for you, for us. They stood there in the observation deck as Earth turned below and the stars wheeled overhead, a human man and an alien woman who had become each other's home. And Zara thought about convergence, and fate and the strange, beautiful paths that lives could take. She thought about the scared 8-year-old boy she'd saved without knowing his name, and the gentle, brilliant man he'd become, and the 23 years of silent love that had led to this moment. "Thank you," she whispered into David's shoulder. "For waiting, for loving me even when I didn't know, for saying yes when I asked." "Thank you," David whispered back. "For running into the fire, for being you, for giving me a reason to believe in miracles." And somewhere in the distance, the station's automated systems chimed the hour, marking the beginning of their first full day as a married couple, not just on paper anymore, but in truth. Zara lifted her head, her eyes meeting David's, and she saw their future reflected there. Mornings with tea and off-key singing, evenings spent reading side by side, a lifetime of small moments and large loves, all built on the foundation of a single act of heroism that had rippled forward through time to bring them here. "I love you," she said again, because the words felt new and powerful and necessary. "I love you, and I'm going to make sure you never doubt it." "I love you too," David replied, brushing a strand of platinum hair behind her pointed ear, his touch gentle and wondering. "I've loved you for 23 years, Zarlin, and I'm going to love you for 23,000 more." It was impossible, of course. Neither of their species lived that long, and time would eventually claim them both. But standing there, in the starlight, holding each other like they were the only two souls in the universe, impossible seemed like just another challenge to overcome together. After all, what was impossible about a scared child who'd grown into a man sustained by love for a girl he'd met once in the midst of disaster? What was impossible about an alien woman who'd saved dozens of lives without knowing she was also saving her own future? What was impossible about two paths crossing and recrossing until convergence became inevitable? Nothing. Everything. It didn't matter. They were here now, and that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.